I'd like to say thank you for joining us this evening for a virtual public open house for the Township of King Rural Zoning Bylaw Review. This is the first of two public open houses that will be held over July and August. The second one is anticipated to be held in mid-August or so, and the date can be confirmed on the Township of King speaking page. So there's lots of opportunity over the next couple of months to learn more about the Rural Zoning Bylaw Review and be informed and provide feedback to the project team. We ask that you ensure that you are muted before we begin, and I'll also note that this open house is being recorded and will be posted to the project webpage following the open house. Some additional housekeeping items before we move into the presentation itself. Again, the meeting is being recorded. Your microphone will be muted until the question and answer period at the conclusion of the formal presentation. We ask that you use the chat box at the bottom of your screen to share ideas, thoughts, and questions as we move through the presentation. And we will do our best to get through all of the questions before 7:30. And just a note, when you are entering your thoughts or ideas or questions in the chat box, just to be sure that you select everyone when entering your questions so that we can all see that input. Who is listening today? Well, I will turn things over to Kristen from the Township to provide an introduction, and then I'll introduce myself and my colleague.
Great, thanks so much, Rob. I'm Kristen Harrison. I'm a policy planner with the Township, and I'm so thankful that you're all joining us this evening for the open house and to provide any comments and feedback that you may have on the bylaw and to learn more about the bylaw moving forward. So I'd like to thank Mayor Steve Pellegrini and Councillor Eek for joining us this evening. I'm not sure if I see any other members of council on the participant list so far, but thank you so much for joining us here this evening. We also have Stephen Naylor, the Director of Growth Management Services, on the call this evening. And I believe that's it from Township. Oh, I see Jamie Smythe is also on the call this evening, and he's our Economic Development Coordinator. So I'm going to turn it back over to Rob for now. Great. And chat more later.
Thanks very much, Kristen. My name is Rob Rappel. Despite what it says on my little alias on Zoom, I'm a senior planner with WSP, who is the lead consultant on this project for the Township. And my colleague is Matt Rodriguez, who's also a planner with WSP. Unfortunately, Matt is unable to join us this evening, but you might recognize his name from previous consultation sessions. So between Kristen and other members of staff at the Township and Matt and I, we formed the project team for the Rural Zoning Bylaw Review. In terms of the agenda for this evening's public open house, we're going to go over six agenda items, beginning with the purpose of the project, and then we'll review what a zoning bylaw is and its function and purpose. We'll then provide an overview of the process and how the draft zoning bylaw has been informed to date. We'll then provide an introduction to the draft zoning bylaw for the countryside and a review of the different components and parts that form the draft zoning bylaw. This will be followed by a question and answer period, and then we'll conclude this evening's public open house with next steps. So welcome to the draft zoning bylaw. This is, I think, an exciting project for WSP and the Township. And the purpose of this public open house is to introduce the draft zoning bylaw for the countryside for the Township. In today's public open house, we will walk through the draft zoning bylaw for the countryside and highlight some of the key changes that are proposed. We'll provide a summary of how feedback from the community and input from the community has shaped the proposed zoning bylaw to date. We'll outline how you can remain informed and provide input, and also view the updated zone mapping. The purpose of the Rural Zoning Bylaw Review is to substantially update Zoning Bylaw 7453, which currently regulates land use within the countryside area of the Township. This project is the first comprehensive review of Zoning Bylaw 7453 since 1974 within the context of the countryside area. The project is intended to review and update, obviously, the country area zoning in the King Township, address a range of issues, opportunities, and recommendations that were identified through the discussion paper, and importantly, implement the Township's new official plan. The countryside area of the township includes the hamlet areas, the rural areas, as well as the agricultural areas. And these areas are all shown highlighted in yellow on this map. Notably, the countryside area of the township does not apply to Schaumburg, Nobleton, or King City.
Sorry to interrupt you, Rob,
No
but
problem.
I think we have a couple of people maybe waiting in the waiting room.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I've admitted those people. Hopefully they're able to join. In terms of what a zoning bylaw does, it establishes provisions that regulate the use of land and such things as the size, height, and location and buildings and structures within the township. This includes considerations such as building height and massing, setbacks, which regulate building location, driveways, parking and loading requirements, lot size and width or lot frontage, lot coverage, as well as regulation of accessory structures like decks and sheds. And it also establishes a range of permitted uses. The zoning bylaw also divides the township into various zones to implement the various land use designations of the official plan, and we'll review each of these zones in this presentation. In terms of an overview of the process to date, phase 1 concluded in December of last year with the discussion paper and a series of open houses. We also provided project updates to the project website and delivered a presentation to council. At the conclusion of phase 1 in December and into January, we began preparing the draft rural zoning bylaw. The draft zoning bylaw itself was released publicly on June 23rd of this year, and we remain in phase 2 by undertaking these open houses and holding meetings with township staff as well as agencies. And how the community is being engaged through phase 2 included topic-specific workshops that were held earlier this year. Of course, these public open houses, as I've mentioned, continued updates to the project webpage, as well as stakeholder meetings. Phase 3 is set to begin in the fall of this year with the final draft zoning bylaw. We anticipate additional opportunity for community engagement through the statutory public meeting, continued updates to the project website, as well as the meeting for consideration for council adoption of the draft, the final rural zoning bylaw. I should also mention that there'll be an additional public open house held in advance of the statutory public meeting. The exact date is to be determined, but it is anticipated to be held in early or mid-September, and we'll be sure to communicate that particular date through the project webpage as well as notices from the township. In terms of informing the zoning bylaw to date, the proposed zoning bylaw for the countryside addresses many key issues and emerging trends, as I've noted previously, and has been informed, substantially informed by continued public and stakeholder input. This includes the discussion paper, which was issued in the fall of 2020, a range of public open houses, as I mentioned, that were held in December of last year, additional zoning workshops that focused on the hamlet and agricultural areas held in April, followed by one-on-one stakeholder meetings with township and a council update that was provided in May. These open houses and all of the future scheduled public meetings and opportunities for community engagement will also help to inform and shape the final zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw structure itself includes 9 formal parts, being administration, definitions, general provisions, the parking and loading requirements, zone classifications and zone maps, the hamlet zones, the rural and agricultural zones, the Oak Ridge Marine zones, and the other zones. We'll review each of these in more detail in the following slides. It also includes a preamble, which is a user guide, and I'm going to discuss that in more detail. The first thing that you'll come across when you open the zoning bylaw is the preamble. And as I mentioned, it serves as a user guide to help users understand how to read and interpret the zoning bylaw. It explains how to check what zones apply to a property, and it also establishes a description of the various zones, as well as how to use and navigate the mapping. It doesn't form an operative part of the zoning bylaw, but we think it's a really useful and important tool if you don't regularly use zoning bylaws, or maybe you need a refresher. It's good to read through that section before you start to get into the details of the zoning bylaw itself. The first operative part of the bylaw is the administration, part 1. It establishes where the zoning bylaw applies within the township. It outlines how the zoning bylaw is to be read and interpreted, and importantly, it includes transition provisions between the existing and the proposed zoning bylaw. Part 2 is definitions. This part of the bylaw defines key words and terms that are used in the bylaw to assist with interpretation and applicability. All permitted uses are defined to make the zoning bylaw easier to use and understand, and defined terms support the interpretation and are italicized to identify when a term is defined. It's a really, really important part of the zoning bylaw and should always be referenced when looking at the defined terms or any term that's italicized within the context of the other parts of the zoning bylaw. Part 3 is general provisions. General provisions apply to certain lands and certain uses throughout the countryside area of the township. They have been comprehensively reviewed, updated, and modernized where appropriate, and we've introduced and proposed many new provisions, such as those that treat additional residential units, on-farm diversified uses, as well as seasonal and permanent farm help dwellings. Part 4 of the bylaw establishes the requirements for parking and loading. This section has also undergone a comprehensive review and update, and the parking standards are organized by different land use categories to aid with interpretation and administration and provide greater clarity to the zoning bylaw itself. We've also proposed to introduce requirements for bicycle parking racks for certain rural uses to support a more cycling friendly community. Part 5 of the zoning bylaw establishes the various zone classifications and zone maps. It establishes and describes the different zones that apply throughout the countryside, as well as provides an overview of how to read and interpret the zone maps. The zone maps themselves can be accessed and provided in both PDF and interactive format on the King Speaking webpage or the project webpage, and I'll provide links to those at the end of the presentation. Part 6 establishes the range of hamlet zones, which includes hamlet residential, hamlet commercial, hamlet employment, as well as hamlet rural zones. We held a workshop earlier this year and heard that the built form and function of the hamlets is unique within the township. On that basis, we've introduced and proposed a range of new hamlet residential zones that recognize the unique character of the hamlet areas. We also heard that it's important to implement the policies and land use designations of the township's official plan as they relate to the hamlet areas. On this basis, we've introduced a series of new hamlet zones that have been proposed, again, to implement those specific official plan land use designations and policies. Part 7 establishes the rural and agricultural zones. We heard that we need to be clear about what is considered an on-farm diversified use. And on that basis, we identified specific types of permitted and on-farm diversified uses, such as agritourism and farm microbrewery, cidery, or winery, for example. We also heard that it's important to direct agriculture-related uses away from prime agricultural lands. On this basis, we've established a framework for agriculture-related uses that intend to be applied through future Planning Act applications. Staying with the rural and agricultural zones, we also heard that it's important to maintain existing environmental protections. On this basis, we've introduced a new agricultural greenbelt zone to implement the policies of the province's greenbelt plan, as well as the policies of the township's new official plan. Lastly, within the rural and agricultural zones, we heard that there's a need to review the framework for farm help dwellings, specifically and more acutely in the context of considerations of lessons learned from COVID-19 on farm help living conditions. On that basis, we've distinguished between permanent and seasonal farm help dwellings. For seasonal farm help dwellings are permitted in the specialty agricultural zone as well as the agricultural greenbelt zone, and permanent farm help dwellings are contemplated as being subject to a site-specific zoning bylaw amendment. Part 8 of the zoning bylaw establishes the various Oak Ridges moraine zones. It largely carries forward the existing Oak Ridges moraine zoning bylaw for the township, being zoning bylaw 2005-23. Part 8 also conforms to and implements the township's official plan, as well as the province's Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan. And we've offered some minor modifications to simplify and shorten the zone symbols to assist with additional clarity and interpretation considerations. Part 9 of the zoning bylaw establishes the remainder of the zones that are established through the draft zoning bylaw. This includes the institutional zone, the future use zone, the open space zone, the major recreational zone, and the environmental protection zone. The major recreational zone is to be applied through future development applications and approvals, while the environmental protection zone largely carry forward as the existing EP zone boundaries. In terms of the zone mapping, there are 3 draft schedules. Schedule A shows the zones established in Part 5 and covers the entire countryside area of the township. Schedule B identifies further regulations that apply to certain properties. And there are two subschedules. Schedule B1 showing the wellhead protection area and Schedule B2 showing the prime agricultural area. Schedule C relates to the various regulations of the Oak Ridges Moraine. Schedule C1 shows the Oak Ridges Moraine area of influence. Schedule C2 shows the Oak Ridges Moraine or the ORM landform conservation area. Schedule C3 shows the ORM areas of high aquifer vulnerability. And Schedule C4 shows the ORM wellhead protection areas. Each of Schedule B and Schedule C are subject to general provisions that are contained in Part 3 of the zoning bylaw and must be read in conjunction with those provisions. To view the zone mapping, you can access the link on the Township's project webpage that's hosted on Speaking. You can search by specific property addresses, and you can also click on specific properties to leave a comment. It's a really useful feature, and we're hoping to see some good input from the community on the mapping. In terms of next steps, of course, the draft zoning bylaw is available for review and input, and we're asking that the comments be provided by August 18th, so mid next month. Following that period, we will consider all comments received on draft zoning bylaw and work to release the final draft zoning bylaw for the countryside this fall. The final draft zoning bylaw will also include the various site-specific amendments that have been passed over the last 25 or 30 years to zoning bylaw 7453, and will be reviewed and incorporated into the final draft zoning bylaw where appropriate. We'll now enter our question and answer period. And just a really quick recap on the housekeeping items. Again, the meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the Township's project webpage. When called upon, please unmute your mic. You can use the chat box again at the bottom of your screen to share ideas, questions, and thoughts. And again, just be sure to include that the everyone option is selected when entering your questions. So I'll now open the floor for additional questions or input to the project team. Okay, Sandra Kendall is asking, can I please have a list of properties going for exemptions? Just to confirm, exemptions, would that be in reference to the exception zone, Sandra?
Yeah, it would be. Can you hear me okay?
Can
you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, sorry. It's just my computer is telling me I have a really bad internet connection for the meeting.
Oh, you're coming through loud and clear.
Woo, yay! Anyway, yeah, what I'm looking for particularly is the Allstone property owned by the Mellows. We've had more than enough trouble with that particular property. As we all know, they're operating as a legal operation because they're Oak Ridges Marine Countryside and they're rural general. What we have on that property is a transfer station and numerous other issues of storage, open storage, waste management, sandblasting, and noise violations. So I want to know what's going forward with that property, please. 16105 Highway 27.
Sure. Okay, we can make a note of that, and we can follow up. I can't speak to that at the moment.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, I certainly have asked before on our previous one-on-one type meeting, and I was told certainly that they were not zoned for their activities that they're doing and the interference to my property. So I'm still suggesting to the town and council and these consultants what's going on with that property as they continue to expand and violate various noise and zoning bylaws. When will that be enforced against that property?
Yeah, and I appreciate that feedback to this process. And I think, you know, our principal and sort of primary purpose of undertaking the zoning bylaw review is to advance the township's new official plan. With regards to enforcement, that may be a separate discussion to have with the township, but I know that Chris and myself would be happy to have a follow-up discussion with you again.
Right, and I'd appreciate that, because as we know, the official plan is a little bit, what's the right word, hung up with my LPAT appeal, looking forward to finding out what's going on with that property, among other things. One of the exemptions in the official plan, that kind of open 3-year exemption to a property owner, is not clear to me. You can have a use of your property for 3 years and it can be extended. I want to know how that's going to impact me as a resident, long-term resident here, that my concerns are not being addressed. At this time, King Township will not respond to noise violation complaints that I file, and have not for at least a year. York Region Police are, and as the mayor is now sitting on that board, keep that in mind. But now I have to go to York Region, and I have to get a lawyer to enforce my rights and losses to my own economics at my property as a farmer. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Okay, there's a question from Larry. Under the AS zoning, how many acres of land do you need to sever into a separate lot? I can confirm that there are sort of very prescriptive policies established through the township's new official plan with regards to lot severance. I think that's something that we could take away and confirm with you, Larry, if you're able to email the project team or email Kristen, and we can provide additional context on those official plan policies.
Okay, thanks. And just to continue, I think, on what Sandra was talking about. I mean, the zoning bylaws are good to have, but the penalties and the enforcement is an issue that I think applies or that's been experienced throughout. I mean, in my area, slightly different issue, but still the same thing. Odor, they're growing marijuana in an area that was not supposed to. And when you try to raise those issues in terms of controlling the smell, it's falling on deaf ear. Like, nobody responds, nobody does it. So what is the purpose of having the rules and then people violate them and there is no penalties for violating those rules? Like, it becomes a catch-22. It just becomes frustration. Like, I know now there's, somebody else is going to start building to start storing equipment and so forth. Now, that's going to, when I read the bylaw, it's not allowed. But when the guy does it, what are the penalties for people violating the rules of the bylaw? And if the rules are go phone the police, go phone the other guy, go phone the other guy, it just becomes frustrating on the citizen that is abiding by the rules. So we might as well just not even follow them.
Yeah, I can certainly appreciate that that frustration and that concern. And the bylaw does, as you mentioned, establish the various regulations which are enforceable as a bylaw. And I know the township, I'm sure, works hard to do their best to enforce the regulations established through the bylaw. But I can certainly appreciate your concerns.
So I think, if we're going to have success with this, I'm encouraging the team to focus on the section of penalties and enforcement. Like, we need to have, because even, the poor guys on the town that are going to go and try to implement these rules, if they don't have the empowerment, if they don't have the rules or if they don't have the ability to enforce those things, it becomes a useless exercise. So again, we're spending a lot of money. There's a lot of good studies. There's a lot of good things. But at the end of the day, it's no different. If I speed down the highway, I know exactly what I'm going to get. There's going to be a police who's going to give me a ticket. And, I lose the merit points and so forth. If I violate the zoning bylaw, like if I create an odor that I'm not supposed to, nothing happens. So, you can have all the bylaws that you want, but if they're not going to be enforced, it's a waste of time.
Maybe, Rob, if I can just chime in a little bit here.
Yeah.
So thank you for the comments, and we do understand and appreciate that enforcement can sometimes be difficult and sometimes a long task. So a new bylaw, like the one that we're creating here, will help us to enforce the bylaws. So updating provisions, making sure that they're current and enforceable will help downstream with our bylaw enforcement. So having an up-to-date bylaw is very important and will show that the township is proactive about addressing these new types of uses that seem to be popping up throughout the township. So
I think
tighter restrictions and more fulsome bylaw.
And I think, Kristen, if I can, just to build on your point, we've made a very concerted effort through this review and update of the zoning bylaw to introduce greater clarity to the defined terms, as well as the permitted uses. And again, from an administration and enforcement perspective, having that clarity in terms of not only defined terms, but the various requirements and provisions and restrictions is critically important from the township's perspective too, when it comes to enforcement and penalties.
Yeah, and just one more thing to add to that, Rob. We are working with our bylaw enforcement division and growth management services to review the bylaws, so that they'll have input into this bylaw as well, and that'll help to build a stronger bylaw.
Thanks, Kristen. Larry, is it okay to move on to the next question? We've got quite a few in the chat here.
Sure, of course, but
okay. Thank you very much. Susan asks, also, oh, sorry, might have jumped ahead here. Susan has two questions. The first question is, I noticed the definitions are not consistent with the ORMCP zoning bylaw 2005-23. Missing are rural institutional use, low intensity recreation, major recreational uses, small scale uses. The recreational definition, too much broader than the ORMCP. Conformity with the ORMCP is required. Further, there is no natural core category. It seems to be meshed with the linkage designation. The permitted uses in the NC and linkage areas are different. So I think there's a lot of good thoughts there. I can, just with regards to the permitted uses that are treated through the draft zoning bylaw, confirm that they have been reviewed against the policies of the township's new official plan. And the province also undertook a comprehensive review of the various provincial plans, including the ORMCP, I believe it was in 2017. So there are updates to the Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan that would not have been necessarily reflected in zoning bylaw 2005-23. So again, one of the principal intents of this exercise is to advance and implement the township's new official plan, which does conform to the various provincial plans, including the Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan. But I think to your point, Susan, there is an opportunity there, and we can certainly go back to ensure that we're appropriately capturing the range of uses that may be captured, that may be identified through the province's plan. With regards to the natural core category, the question right further, there's no natural core category. It seems to be meshed with the linkage designation. We've, I think, largely carried forward the zone nomenclature through 2005-23. I think they were refined just to reflect the township's new official plan slightly, but we haven't substantially modified the zone nomenclature or the zone structure. So the various land use designations that are contemplated through the province's Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan are obviously reflected in the township's new official plan and are intended to be implemented through the draft zoning bylaw. Susan then follows up with another question that reads, also issues with the ORMCP institutional definition, public services, libraries, police stations, and emergency services should be directed to settlement areas as per the ORMCP and PPS, not to the countryside. Will changes be made to conform to the ORMCP? Again, I appreciate this question, and those are considerations that we can certainly take away and ensure that we're conforming to both the ORMCP and the township's new official plan. Susan, did you want to follow up at all, or are those responses okay for now?
Hi, yeah. So the ORMCP, the township is required to conform to it, and the township cannot make any decisions that are consistent or that don't conform with the Indigenous Land Conservation Plan. So it's the highest level that we need to obtain. It's not whether or not it conforms with the official plan as much as whether it conforms with the ORMCP. So that's my concern. I just did a brief review today of the definitions in the Indigenous Land Conservation Plan. They do not seem to be consistent. So I think there's going to be legal challenges if there is a lack of consistency there. And I think we need to stay out of court as much as possible. So that's just my suggestion.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate those points and some good thoughts offered through your comments. So again, I think that's something that that the project team can certainly take away and have a closer take a closer review of. I appreciate that. Thank you. Tony notes that 800,000 people are coming into York Region in the next few decades. How many people are forecasted to enter into King? That's a very specific question. I don't know if I know that off the top of my head. I know the township just undertook their new official plan review, and maybe it's top of mind for Kristen.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks, Tony, for the question. So York Region is currently undertaking their what's called a municipal comprehensive review, and that's their official plan review for the entirety of the region. And the region divvies up the population growth that allocated from the province to each of the local municipalities. And the region has recently released a draft forecast and lands needs assessment. And that's showing the population of King Township growing to 49,600 by the year 2051. So the township's next official plan review would take a look at that population and how to assign it within the township. So typically that would be to our villages like King City, Nobleton, and Schaumburg. So we would look at how and where we would grow through that official plan review process. So the zoning bylaw doesn't really contemplate where growth will occur. It just sets out the permitted uses for the existing properties in the township.
Okay, and if I may follow up on something else. I hope everyone is doing well, Your Worship. If there's any counselors, everyone else that's attending this meeting. I know COVID-19's been stressful for everybody, so I hope everyone is doing well. If I can just take a minute to talk about the zoning bylaw, if that's okay. The issue that I have is I guess the white belt that is in the proposed zoning bylaw, and specifically Nobleton. You know, King Township is the GTA's playground. It should be noted that Nobleton used to be this small town and everybody knew everybody, but now, you know, there is this proposal to grow Nobleton, and the Nobleton as it is now, it is a fantastic community. Tasca Park, with the leadership of the mayor, it's a great success, and also with the councilors that were involved in this. But for areas of interest for urban sprawl, I believe that Nobleton right now is going to lose, it's already losing that small town feel. And I think that the Nobleton should stay the way it is, and some of the population growth should be put on the outskirts of King Township. So specifically where the town line is, Caledon King Town Line, you know, on the map it says that the farmlands that are on the 12th is prime, but I can tell you, I live on the 12th concession, and these are not prime farmlands. The land here needs to be worked, and it is actually very, very not sustainable. And the only thing that we do really grow here is hay. So I really hope that council and your worship will consider rezoning the 12th as it's not prime farmland here. And if it does get rezoned, it should be low to mid density for building, and CO2 emissions, green thinking should be part of this as well. You know, let's not forget that CO2 emissions is a big problem, and we need to curb CO2. I just want to thank you all for allowing me to speak, and I hope everyone does. Hope everyone stays well and get over this COVID-19 situation. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Tony. I appreciate that input. Maybe I'll let Kristen jump in too, but I will just say that our primary sort of purpose of undertaking this zoning bylaw review is, again, to implement and advance the various policies and land use designations of the official plan. And through the zoning bylaw review process, we generally have an opportunity to be more sort of restrictive in terms of the policies of the official plan, but we don't have an opportunity under the Planning Act to be more permissive. So if there are areas in the official plan within the township that are contemplated for some growth or change over the planning horizon, then that could certainly be considered through the zoning bylaw review process. However, there are large areas of the township and obviously within the countryside area that aren't necessarily contemplated for future growth at this time. And therefore, we wouldn't be able to necessarily advance those policies through the zoning bylaw review process.
Yeah, and thanks, Robin. I just wanted to maybe just add a little bit just to say that about the prime agricultural area, the region has identified what's prime agricultural throughout the region and what would be considered rural. And the township had to update our official plan in accordance with the region's official plan as like a hierarchy of documents. So, and there really isn't an opportunity for the township to change what's considered prime agricultural in the township. That would be done at the regional level through the region's MCR, so their official plan review process, and certainly not something we can do through the zoning bylaw review.
Thank you, Kristen.
Rob, can I just jump in?
Yeah, of course, Stephen, please do.
Sorry. I just wanted also to make note that Kristen earlier said that the population projected, at least to be distributed to the township by the region, is 49.6. Of that 49.6, just over 10,000 is proposed to be located in Nobleton to 2051. There was a report that was prepared and provided to council at the last council meeting, which discusses the population distribution. And I'll just make note of that. I don't have the number handy at the moment, but coming out of that report to council, they did direct staff to do a consultation concerning the population projection for the from the region and where it should be located. And staff are putting together what that consultation process will look like. It'll likely happen in September after the summer, where after everyone gets over their vacations and hopefully COVID. So we'll be coming out with that. You'll see some sort of communication through the papers and on speaking about that consultation. But I just want to make note of that, because certainly I didn't want to leave the impression with anyone that the entire 49.6 was going into either the White Belt or Nobleton. In fact, staff expressed a lot of reservations, as did council, about the White Belt and the use thereof for further population growth. So thanks, Rob.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephen. I appreciate that additional context. Tony, is there anything else you'd like to add or follow up on?
No, that's pretty much it. It's just that, yes, I understand that it's part of the regional level where they designate the land, but I just don't want people to, I just want people to understand that prime farmland is more in the core of King. Along the 12th, I could tell you with a factual statement that this is not prime farmland. There's only 3 active farms. 2 of these farms are farmed by someone else and not the landowner. So it's rented out. So, just that, property development, it can help in many ways. But it has to be done with the environment in mind, and it should be looked at where you don't have this urban sprawl going into one area. Like 10,000 people in Nobleton, that's a lot of people, especially when King is one way. They're just single lanes, and also 27. This is why I'm suggesting the township should look at the town line, also, near the 400 corridor, and the main roads, Keel, Jane, up towards Highway 9. That's basically it. And I look forward to meeting with everyone again in August as well. So thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Tony. Appreciate your participation today. Ian Stewart asks, Sandra raises an interesting point. Does the current bylaw review process allow applications similar to the official plan to grandfather existing uses under the current bylaw? That's a really good question, Ian. There are, I think, 2 parts of the bylaw that may be of interest. The first is the transition provisions, which recognize various Planning Act applications that have been submitted or approved within a certain time frame, or that remain under review by the township. There are also provisions in the bylaw that recognize previously legally existing uses, and they're actually certain rights are actually protected under the Planning Act in that regard. So there are both at the legislative level within the Planning Act and in the zoning bylaw itself provisions that recognize legally existing uses, and to an extent carry those forward into the new zoning bylaw, through the new zoning bylaw, sorry, I should say. Ian, would you like to follow up at all?
No, that's fine. That's a helpful answer.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I hope I'm pronouncing this name right. Eleni, will there be an opportunity to formally comment on the permitted uses for the new zones, for example, or i.e. the agricultural related zone? Certainly. I think that's something that we're looking to receive input on through these public open houses, but you can also send an email to Kristen or through the township's speaking page where the project webpage is located, and we're happy to receive and actually encourage input and comments on a range of zoning interests, including the permitted uses that are currently proposed in the draft zoning bylaw. So we certainly are open to that and looking for input.
Great, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sorry, Rob, I also just added my email there in the chat. So
okay.
Comments can be emailed to kharrison@king.ca.
Perfect. Thanks, Kristen. Larry asked in section 7.4, it talks where agricultural cannabis production is permitted. Can we add the word production and cultivation? I have the zoning bylaw open in front of me, but it might be logistically a bit hard for me to go find the definition for agricultural cannabis production on the spot. But I'm happy to, Larry, I'm happy to go look at that more closely. And I would similarly certainly encourage you to reach out to Kristen with that input, and we'd be happy to follow up with some additional details on what's drafted and proposed in this version of the zoning bylaw, as well as provide some additional context on that. Sandra follows up by saying, I feel these meetings are lovely and seek the ideology of public input, but instead perhaps a lot of bluster for me, as for 10 years I have sought from this town to enforce the bylaws, and in fact the zoning of 16105 Highway 27 to receive now further expansion and one guilty plea against this Allstone. I have an LPAT appeal, and I know notice has been provided for the town for inaction to help support and save my farming income. I feel I'm not heard. That's unfortunate, Sandra. I'm sorry that you feel that way. We again are happy to have a follow-up discussion to hear you and to see how we can work with you through the zoning bylaw review process. Again, Kristen noted her email address in the chat function. I think it might be also noted in her presentation. Yes, here it is. So again, if you would like to follow up or have additional input, please email Kristen. It's also on the project webpage as well. Debbie Schaefer notes that totally agree that we need to work to reduce CO2. Planning to have low-rise residential on 12th concession would drive more CO2 creation. To reduce, we must intensify in our urban places where there is transit, commercial, and schools. I think those are good planning principles to work within, and something that we certainly try to achieve through our work. So thank you, Debbie. And Tony totally disagrees with Debbie. It's good to have these discussions. I think they lead to fruitful fruitful back and forth and considerations for the project team. Susan notes that thank you for the presentation. I plan to send comments. It is vital that the zoning bylaw conforms to the 2017 ORMCP. I think it's fair to say that the project team, the township agrees, and we need to take into consideration the new official plan as well. So appreciate your earlier points, Susan, and we look forward to that input and to take that away and see what we can do to address those through the zoning bylaw. Sandra notes that she looks forward to seeing the exceptions, and there's some good discussion going on around potential development and CO2. I can pause for a few minutes to see if there are any other questions directly related to the zoning bylaw review process or this presentation for the project team. We do have until 7:30 or so.
Rob, I did note there was one other comment from Councillor Eek, just noting that cannabis production is prohibited in the Holland Marsh. So.
Oh, sorry, I don't see that. So maybe that was a direct message. My apologies.
Oh, sorry, it was a direct message. I apologize.
No, I apologize, Councillor and Kristen. Yeah, that was a good question earlier from a member of the community around cannabis production, and I think we can certainly provide some clarity around the policy considerations of the official plan, as well as look to see what we've drafted and provide some follow up.
Just a question in terms of, again, going back to the violations. So if there is a violation or a perceived violation, is it as assumed that we must phone the town, and then is the town going to officially respond back to the person making the claim that there is a violation? What's that process, or how does that process work?
Yeah, maybe Kristen might be, if she's able to offer a little bit more context than I can. Each municipality has a different sort of process and protocol to that extent. But I'm not sure, Kristen, if you're able to answer that question, or maybe we can follow up.
Yeah, I think either myself or Stephen. I might let Stephen jump in here. He's the Director of Growth Management Services, of which the bylaw division is part of. So maybe Stephen, if you want to chime in.
Sure, thank you. I was going to jump in. So yes, what typically will happen if there is a concern or a complaint concerning a potential bylaw infraction, then you can register your comment through the township. Either I don't have the numbers handy, but there's a bylaw number, as well as it can be through the CSR or our Service King desk. And what will happen is that that concern will be provided to one of the bylaw enforcement officers to investigate. They'll open the file, they'll do an investigation, and then they'll determine what, if any, further action is required. And that can be, it could be a matter of hours, it can be a matter of days. It depends on the number or the type of infraction that they're investigating and the complexity. But everyone is investigated, and as I say, it then determined whether further action is necessary. Earlier, I referred to a report that was done at the previous council meeting, or the last council meeting. There was also a report that was brought forward by our manager of bylaw enforcement in terms of establishing a policy with respect to bylaw enforcement. So I'll search the date, but I believe it was the last meeting was towards June 28th or something like that. And if you sourced the agenda for June 28th, you'll see that report as well as the other one I referred to, and you can certainly read that. And if you have any questions, you can certainly contact the manager of bylaw enforcement or myself. So please do. And that's, I think, hopefully that will answer the question.
I will be in touch with you, Stephen.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Larry. Sandra asked, will zoning and bylaw work together? I think the bylaw is just that. It is a law that's passed by council, so it provides a basis for the town to enforce the regulations and requirements that are established through the zoning bylaw. So I think that's at least one of the components that Stephen was just speaking to.
I'm sorry, was I supposed to jump in?
No,
I'm sorry, I missed the question. I think it's centered around the zoning and the bylaw enforcement working together.
Mm-hmm.
Was that, and certainly that just a bit of background, the Growth Management Services Department was established just over a year ago and includes planning, which includes zoning and bylaw enforcement. And one of the principles of putting those divisions together is for indeed to have a liaison and contact and constant communication, and the staff of those departments do meet and they do share information and input. So that is pretty much ongoing and constant. And I know the bylaw enforcement officers have regular discussions with our zoning administrator. So yes, there is a great deal of back and forth. And I think, as Kristen said too, both the zoning administrator and the officers are going to have ample opportunity for input into and review of this bylaw to make sure that what they see in the field and how this bylaw is constructed, that it makes sense to them in terms of what they see in action.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate it. I think Ian might be drafting another question directed to Stephen. Ian, you're welcome to come off mute and ask the question as well if you'd like to. Ian says, thanks. Hi, Stephen. Thanks for your clarification. It sounds like you are the person that can help Sandra with her outstanding concerns.
We're happy to help in any way we can, for sure.
I don't know if anybody's joined by or doesn't have the ability to write a message. So you're also welcome to come off mute and ask a question verbally if you'd like to.
Just a comment, all of the comments that have been made tonight on the chat, but is that, can one assume that those will be like written form of comments that have been submitted to the team? Or, you know, you mentioned earlier to address some of these concerns to Kristen, but you know, if the comments have been put in the chat, is that considered an official input into the project?
I think we would ask, if possible, to follow up more formally with the project team or Kristen with an email. But we are taking notes, and we do have the chat box sort of documented, so we're able to include this correspondence and provide a follow up as well. So we're certainly open to receiving input, and we'll do our best to address these questions directly. But for the purpose of the project, I think it's more desirable to receive sort of more formal written correspondence in an email to one of the project team members. We will also, I should say, we will also have, as I mentioned at the outset, this meeting is being recorded, and it will be posted to the project webpage. So it is documented in that perspective, from that perspective as well.
Okay.
Are there any other questions or comments regarding the draft zoning bylaw? We will hold the second open house in August, so we're happy to have you take away the draft zoning bylaw and take some more time to go through it, and join us again in a few weeks' time to ask questions and engage Kristen and myself and the project team. Okay, I'm not hearing anything. I'm happy to stay on until 7:30, but for those of us that are on the call now, just in terms of staying informed and providing feedback, I've noted the upcoming public open house. Again, you're invited to ask questions and provide feedback to the draft zoning bylaw on the speaking webpage or by contacting Township staff. We do ask that those comments be provided by August 18th of this year. That provides an opportunity for us to take those under consideration as we're preparing the final draft zoning bylaw to be issued this fall. And comments will continue to be accepted after this date, but given the project timeline, it may be challenging for us to sort of recognize those or provide a formal follow-up response with the final draft zoning bylaw, but you will receive a follow-up before the end of the project and through the statutory public meeting process. And to that end, comments and input received and following the statutory public meeting will be considered as part of the final zoning bylaw for the countryside. And again, a link is provided to the speaking webpage where the interactive map and PDF versions of the map are available, as well as the draft zoning bylaw and the discussion paper and various other documents and records of various public meetings that have taken place to support this project. So I encourage you to visit that webpage. It's an excellent resource for additional project information and context. So thank you very much for everyone's participation this evening. I will stay on until 7:30 in case we have somebody join late, but that concludes our formal presentation for this evening.